Jensen and the Lady of the Manor, Part 5, by Jules Sanderson. Read by Jules Sanderson. It was a perfect night for a robbery. The moon was obscured behind heavy cloud cover, and a light rain fell. Only the most ardent of dog walkers would be about, and they'd likely have turned in by this late hour. The houses in the exclusive Willowdale estate were all dark, and silence reigned behind their ostentatious wrought-iron gates. I wouldn't normally have chosen to burgle a house like this. My tastes leaned more towards country houses, secluded and preferably empty. Number 62 Hansard Crescent was neither. It was, however, insured with Favershams, and as Mrs. Sinclair had pointed out, just such a target might be ideal to throw the attentions of the local constabulary off my scent. While the local police had only paid me the most cursory of visits, the last thing they would expect would be for someone they'd already had a chat with to promptly go out and commit a robbery. As Mrs. Sinclair pointed out, a burglar who felt the attentions of the police would be more inclined to lie low. So to find that this minor local crime spree was continuing would draw them to the conclusion that they had yet to rattle the right cage. None of this was front of mind as I surveyed the house. I knew Hansard Crescent to be heavily cameraed. For this very reason I'd chosen a small dinghy from the sailing club on the river upstream, and slowly drifted the mile or so downstream to the rear of the house on the rain-pocked river. I'd pulled the dilapidated dinghy into the reeds and then stepped onto the bank at the end of the garden that rolled down from the house. All was silent as I waited quietly to be quite sure everyone was asleep. In my black pack I carried the device I would soon use to disable the alarm. These moments of caution are probably unnecessary, the watching and waiting, just to be quite positive things are safe. I'd made my mind up that the coast was indeed clear, and was about to step out of the cover of the bushes when a slight movement at the back of the house caught my eye. I stopped myself and watched in absolute silence. To my surprise, I found myself looking at a black-clad figure, almost invisible in the night, working quietly away at the door with what I guessed was a lockpick. I was stunned. Who would have the gall? My curiosity was mixed with admiration. This was a professional, no doubt about it. I wondered why they would choose to use the door and not a window, as doors are much more likely to be wired with a contact breaker. Unless, of course, I looked at the house again. He must have cut the power somehow. No wonder the place was so dark. As I surveyed the back of the house, I realized that not a single light was on. A few things rushed through my mind. The power cut would trigger the remote alarm. From that moment, our thief would have not more than about 15 or 20 minutes if the security company were on their toes. As I watched, our thief finally opened the door and disappeared within. Knowing it was time to make a quick exit, I silently made my way back to the boat, placed my pack in the bow, and cast off. It hadn't escaped me that had I arrived so much as 1 minute later, I could have found myself caught up in a very uncomfortable mess. On the other hand, I checked the boat's drift and pulled in beneath a stone bridge. Securing the boat, I moved quietly up to the road and took position behind one of the large trees that lined this, the only way in or out of the Willowdale estate. There I settled down and waited. The following afternoon found me at a prearranged meeting place on a bridle path beside a picturesque copse of small trees. A rider in the distance urged on their horse, and I surveyed the view, wondering when Mrs. Sinclair might appear. I checked my watch. It was 3 o'clock, and this was the right place. A moment later the horse rounded a twist in the track, and I realized the athletic form of the rider was none other than Mrs. Sinclair. I watched as she dismounted and tied the impressive animal to a low-hanging branch. "I had no idea you rode, Mrs. Sinclair," I said as she walked over to where I sat. Her jodhpurs, white and perfect, exaggerated the muscular shape of her legs, and the tight leather riding boots completed the picture. I must say, I don't find myself being particularly impressed by such things, as much as I would have been in my youth, but the sight of Mrs. Sinclair in that riding jacket, walking toward me, crop in hand, did spark something within. "A successful adventure last night?" she asked, as she sat down on the log next to me. "I'm sorry," I said, surprised at her turn of phrase. "You did okay with your efforts last night?" she said, rephrasing the question. "Oh, of course," I replied, my mind a little muddled after Mrs. Sinclair's unsettling appearance. "Well, sort of, anyway." I went on to describe how I'd encountered another visitor to the house, then waited and watched until sure enough they emerged on foot from the Willowdale estate, only for me to discreetly follow them as they walked the 3 miles to the nearby town and the comfort of a nice warm bed. I'd slept till noon after returning to the river, retrieving the boat and sorting things out, ultimately returning to my bed at 5 a.m. "What an exciting night you've had. Well, well," she said, looking off into the distance. "This might be very useful." "I think so. It also makes things a little more complicated for the police," I said. "It certainly does. Didn't you say that there was an address on their list that wasn't one of ours?" I liked that. One of ours. "Yes, it must be one of this guy's." "Which tells us they've been at it for a little while," she mused. "It looks rather that way," I agreed. "Very interesting," she concluded, opening the button on her hunting jacket and leaning back comfortably on the log. For a moment she seemed lost in thought. "Everything going okay for you?" I said. "I mean, with your husband and everything." "Oh, that," she replied. "Christopher seems happy to clear out and leave me with the bills and a big house to rattle around in. The bugger's still in Paris with his little French tart." There followed an awkward pause. I didn't feel I should offer an opinion. At length I said, "Well, I hope it's not too difficult." Eventually Mrs. Sinclair turned to me and said, "Well, it's sort of sweet of you to be concerned. I'm all right, but I saw the way you looked at me when I got here." "I don't know what you mean," I protested. "Yes, you do. You think I've not seen that look before? Anyway, put it from your mind. It wouldn't be professional. And besides, we have other things to keep ourselves busy." "What are you talking about?" "Well, with my newly found condition of penury, I think we should set our sights a little higher, don't you?" Be sure to follow and subscribe. You can find more stories and support this channel at FionaDobson.com and patreon.com/FionaDobson.